In 1859, Charles Darwin published the first edition of his famous literary work titled Origin of Species. The introduction outlines Darwin's urge to publish due to his deteriorating health and pressure from other naturalists at the time. These naturalists include Sir Charles Lyell, Sir Joseph Dalton Hooker, and Alfred Russel Wallace. Hooker is recognized as a dear friend and colleague that Darwin uplifts for assisting his efforts. Darwin informs readers that his findings are not perfectly complete, but they provide evidence necessary for the public to assess and challenge. Further along, Vestiges of the Natural History of Creation is mentioned to display Charles Darwin's inquiry regarding coadaptation and understanding its importance. Consequently, Darwin's work is based on numerous conclusions that stem from questions derived from origin of organic life, distribution of populations, and embryonic relationships. Darwin introduces his thoughts on variation and the effects of external conditions on succession. A brief illustration of each chapter is provided in the introduction as Darwin emphasizes favorable conditions for variation, competition among vegetation and population, and the many elements of natural selection. Charles Darwin completely objects the idea of independent creation and concludes his introduction with a firm position on descendental ancestry and natural selection. In Chapter 5 of Origin of Species, Charles Darwin highlights a universally limited understanding of the laws of variation. He discusses error in previously saying variation is based on chance. Affirmatively, Darwin links variation to conditions that organisms are exposed to across numerous generations. The nature of conditions and the nature of offspring as a consequence of reproductive disturbance are duly contributed to susceptibility. Charles Darwin suggests that natural factors like climate and vegetation truly affect coadaptation variance, but these factors are limited to understand due to the lack of clear evidence. Through the use of shells, birds, and plants, Darwin illustrates a variety of species and the differing environments in which they inhabit. He expresses the conflict in determining how much variation comes from natural selection and how much comes from the conditions of life. Darwin expresses the consequences of use and disuse of body parts that lead to strengthening and enlargement or total diminishment. As generations arise, modifications are inherited, and Darwin mentions the limitations that come with understanding parent structure. Darwin discusses acclimatization, in which organisms become accustomed to their environment over time and readily produce variation among species with relationships that are not always understandable. He outlines organ variation in advanced species and the correlation of growth that is visible in homologous parts. Rudimentary parts are more susceptible to reversion and disuse. Although what Darwin knows on variation is limited, a large amount accounts for proof of common ancestry. Since 1859, more information has been discovered regarding Darwinism and the laws of variation. Scientific experimentation has uncovered relevant data that aligns with Darwin's views and extends his view of variation with an influx of genetic data. Geneticists have studied Gregor Mendel's theories about inheritance that couple with information Darwin did not fully understand in the 19th century. In a journal article from the History of Biology called Darwin on Variation and Heredity, Rasmus G. Winther discusses how Darwin's ideas differ from the 20th century. He explains the progress made after the publication of Origin of Species regarding Darwin's view of pangenesis in 1868. Pangenesis outlines the route of genetic information to gametes, thus coupling reproductive effects with variation and diversity among other species. Darwin aforementioned that the laws of variation are limited due to struggle to find disposable evidence. However, modern studies have aligned with Darwin's view on the overall pattern of variation that occurs prior to environmental selection. Later versions of Origin of Species support Darwin's solidification of externalism and how changes in the conditions of life triggered variation. Hereditary data has been discovered that connects the changes seen across species on a microscopic level. This is something Darwin could not see nor understand at the time. DNA has contributed to variation at the genetic level, which consequently leads to phenotypic variety that Darwin witnessed himself. The laws of variation have recently been culturally studied by anthropologists, biologists, and other scientists across the world. There has been a wide variety of evidence that supports the notion of distinct characters being shared by multiple generations of organisms. In a study on shape variation and modularity of skull and teeth in domesticated horses and wild equids, Laura Heck and others analyzed the similarities and differences between the structure of the upper body among wild horses. Heck and others state, results support Darwin's hypothesis that shape variation in the skull of domesticated horses is similar to the shape variation of all wild extinct equid species. This study was completed in 2018, which represents a modern assessment of Darwin's beliefs. Progress is evident in expanding Darwin's views and using them to test relationships between the organisms seen in modern nature. In the background section, the authors state, Darwin proposed that great differences among horse breeds can be found in the skull. Based on its complexity in the form and origin as well as its relation to important vital functions, the skull is the most commonly used marker or morphological variation. Heck's paper analytically maps out diagrams of horses' modularity, which is similar to Darwin's sketches from the Galapagos Islands. It is evident that scientific experiments are still being done that mimic Darwin's efforts and have provided extensive information about the laws of variation. The laws remain limited, but scientists are discovering new variations among species every day. In the concluding chapter of Origin of Species, Charles Darwin expresses the theoretical impact of his findings and the importance of descent with modification. He summarizes his main points and reinforces natural selection. Darwin wants the world to recognize that his thorough analysis is indeed in-depth, but still lacks definitive character and gaps remain. He restates various arguments for his theory that include environmental variation, survival of the fittest, competition, consequential variation in generations that stems from natural selection, and divergence. Darwin suggests that these ideas strengthen assurance and diminish doubt. He questions the opinions of opposing naturalists that believe in divine creation, random appearance of tissue, and other ideals. Darwin considers these opinions to be stubborn and merely a result of lacking proof. To conclude his essay, Charles Darwin aims to encourage those who possibly agree with his theory. He highlights the revolutionary impact his essay may have in science and continuously addresses his platform regarding descent with modification. Darwin hopes scientists in the near future will learn to explain the relationships between species and give them a systematic connection that is supported by physical data. He does recognize the possibility of a creator that could account for the first common ancestors, but scientists must further study descent and evolution through thoughtful analysis. To read along and follow with this video, please review Assignment 1 for Evolution 3040. As you can see, a summary of the introduction of Origin of Species, a summary on Chapter 5, the laws of variation. You can also review scientific progress made on the laws of variation since Darwin's time, and a summary of the concluding chapter of Origin of Species. A literature cited is also available that gives you links to all the documents used and referenced in the essay. Thank you.